Zhang, and I'm the Vice Provost for Institutional Effectiveness and Planning at Carnegie Mellon University.
I'm Matt Holstman. I'm the Director of Data Science and Advanced Analytics at CMU.
Okay. So I said I forgot to flip the page. We have 30 minutes, so we are not going to waste a lot of time. But today we're going to talk about just more of a very high level. Our office is institutional, basically research and planning. We don't look at data from the librarian perspective, from the other perspective. We are more from an institutional, organizational effectiveness perspective. So what we're going to do is share a model of how we look at faculty performance from both scholarly work perspective, the teaching, public service, and also the societal impact perspective. And then we'll kind of look at some of the resources we use. But the fun part is going to be Matt Husama sharing some of the examples that we use in how do you use SciVal data to support that kind of line of analysis. So let me go quickly to our conceptual model. This, I don't know if you can read it very easily, but we definitely send us an email. We'll send you the slide deck. Without looking at the detail, we can see that, from a faculty performance evaluation standpoint, there are 4 big buckets of indicator from an organizational assessment standpoint. The first one is research and development. The second part is teaching. And the third part is service. Service in terms of public service, service to the department, service to the professional society, and then the impact. What kind of impact the faculty research have from like a technology licensing, the patent, the government policy influence, media influence. So when you look at these 4 big buckets together, we are looking at evaluating faculty's performance in a much more holistic and comprehensive way. Depends on what kind of university you have, and definitely they emphasize slightly different areas. For today, we are going to emphasize a lot more on the research side because that's where we actually use the Elsevier data in our university setting, particularly in SciVal data. And we are looking at number of areas in terms of just the total, the volume, the quantity of publication in terms of publication, citation count, and those are the numbers also used in the rankings. So they're kind of important to our office because we look at the ranking all the time. And the second dimension, from using the SciVal data standpoint, it is the impact in terms of influence in the profession, in the field, in terms of citation count, impact factors, and the last one is the intellectual leadership. Are they leading? How often they publish in the top tier journals, how often they're cited by the top journals in those areas. I think those are the things that we use to evaluate our kind of disciplinary strength and leadership among the university. When we do strategic planning, we always want to know is that where do we have the strength put into from a discipline, from a area expertise, not only looking at the current one, but looking at the future. If we're looking from a university strategic planning standpoint, 10 years from now, where can we be like the leader? And currently, we are leader in AI, computer science, engineering, but in 10 years, it could be very different. So we're starting thinking about the emerging area. How can we position our university in those areas? And data is very important in strategic planning. We want to make sure that when we say something that we are good at, we actually have data support it. One good example is that I think maybe it's true on your campus as well. Every time we talk about research strength, people will say, oh, we are very good at interdisciplinary research. Well, where do we have the data evidence? Now, that's the hard part. It is very hard. I know that Time Higher Education has the interdisciplinary ranking. That is very hard to get the right data. I mean, we are still struggling with the measurement piece. It's important, but it's very hard to measure. So I think sometimes we have to look at data and look at how we can use the data to support some of the planning assumptions. The next page basically is the same model, but we kind of outline some of the data resources for each one of the dimension. And as I shared with someone earlier, I said that, when we look at data, performance evaluation, we have to use data from all sources because Elsevier is great, but Elsevier does not have everything. Sometimes we have to complement with other data resources. I was just talking to Damon. One of the things is that, if we want to look at media impact, that variable used to be in SciVal, but it's not there anymore. So we look at our major score, we have to go somewhere else. But altogether, all these data resources are all important to present you with a much more robust view of the university performance. And SciVal is definitely plays a very important role in how we use data to support a research operation and strategy making. I'm going to go a little bit faster because some of the examples are going to be much more interesting and also takes a lot more time to elaborate. We are the kind of people working in the institutional research and planning, and our function is going to be somewhat different to a few people here. So from our office standpoint, we support the university in terms of developing more like a data support for strategic faculty recruitment, for new emerging program development. We're also looking at how faculty and staff and students can work together to promote some of the key signature programs in terms from a strategic focus standpoint. We also use the data to support some of the equity issues in terms of faculty salary, faculty compensation, also the recruiting of candidates from different diverse group of people. And at the end of the day, we all know that the research landscape is somewhat uncertain and challenging. We also need to promote a lot more collaboration. How to identify industry collaborators is another key area that we want to use the data to support and create a network support. As an office, we don't focus a lot on the individual level assessment or the college or department level. We more focus on more institutional perspective. So SciVal as a product is really useful for our department because we are able to do a lot of benchmarking, comparison, peer kind of competitive landscape analysis. And some of the examples we use, you can see it is so helpful to have that data perspective, and we want to look at the changes over time and how we compare to our peers or competitors. I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Henry. So yes, we're going to go through a couple of examples of screenshots and things that we've taken out of SciVal that have been useful in this, especially in the institutional context, and looking at how we compare to other universities. So one of the key questions that we're constantly asked in our office is, how are we strategically positioned? This has impacts on our strategic planning process. We just updated our strategic plan in the past year. It has impacts on ranking factors, has impacts on when we're going for grants or research collaborations or funding. How are we comparing to other universities? So one of the most basic charts you can look at, and you can just pull this right out of SciVal, is looking at your citation counts compared to your scholarly output. So what's the volume of publications that our faculty are putting out? And then what's the impact of those? How often are they being cited by other people in their field? So here we've filtered to look at just artificial intelligence over a 10-year period. You can see Carnegie Mellon is way up in the top right corner, which we like to see. But you can kind of divide this into quadrants, or you can draw an extra diagonal line. Or are you kind of above or below that diagonal line? Gives you a quick impact of where you are. But this particular view can hide a lot of the data, because some of those key drivers in artificial intelligence, MIT, CMU, Berkeley, Stanford, you see way over to the side. But once we start to look at some of the other ways we can normalize some of these, the picture can change somewhat. So here we've changed those metrics. So now we're looking at output, but not total scholarly output, just output that was published in the top 10 percentile of journals. And then so both the publications and then the citations that are in the top 10 percentile too. This gives a very different picture. Now you can see at the very top, Stony Brook University emerges. So this is where you're kind of normalizing not just by the volume of your research that you're doing, but what's the impact and how does that compare to where it's being published? What's the impact? How often is it getting cited by other researchers who are at the very tops of their field? So those are where you can start to have universities that may have a very small department, but a very strong faculty member in that department who's doing a lot of high quality and impactful research. So this can really kind of change the view when you start to look at some of these more normalized metrics. Here we can add a third dimension. So here we've changed, it's the same X and Y axis, but we've changed the bubble size now to be the volume of impact. So you can see, compared to our previous slide, CMU and MIT are kind of right next to each other they're labeled right there. But if you add in that bubble size, CMU and MIT are very different in terms of their volume of output. So we're a much smaller university than MIT, but strategically in impact and the impact measures, we're very similar to them, even though they're a much larger university. So they're doing more research than us, but we're very competitive with them in terms of the volume and quality of the. One is citations and one is publications, yes. So looking at those, you can start to see, where you might have smaller departments, like we said, that are doing very high quality research. You can also start to filter some of those on the types of research that you're doing. So here we're looking at the bubble sizes again are scholarly output, but this time scholarly output that has been cited in public policy documents. So you can start to see where are you having that impact. Are you having impact only in academia, or are you having more of a public interest, more of a public service with governmental agencies in the current research funding landscape? Having those relationships and being cited in those types of government and policy documents may help with securing additional funding on future projects. So it's very important to look at those two. And there's a number of ways you can do that. So here we're looking at the bubble sizes are by academic and corporate collaboration. So these are papers where one of the authors is from your university and a second author is from someone in the industry outside of academia. Here you can see there's not a lot of difference across all the universities. A lot of people are having similar percentage of publications where they're having those industry collaborators on their papers. But if we change that to look at academic and government collaboration, so one author is from your university, a second author is from a governmental or nonprofit organization, there's a lot of differences there. You can see that some of our key peers or competitors are starting to have very different size relationships there. So that's where we're starting to establish some of those relationships with those governmental organizations, with the National Science Foundation, with National Institutes of Health, with the Department of Education, with some of those large-scale federal agencies. Having those relationships can be a benefit to your university as well and help strategically position you as you're going for some of those funding opportunities in the future. How are we on time? Oh, we're actually going much faster than I thought. So those are some of the ways that we've started to look at those. It's very easy to use. You can see just the drop-down menu at the top. You can choose different factors. Here we focused on kind of publications in the top 10 journal percentages and then citations in the top 10%. You can change those to other normalized metrics as well. And there's a whole host of metrics that you can include in here. But it's important to think of those not just as the total volume, but try to look at some of those metrics that are more normalized or standardized. So you can find not just the large universities, that the bigger your university is, the more publications and citations you're always going to have. But if you can look at some of those metrics that are more looking at the quality of the research or the impact of the research, you can start to get a little bit different picture of where some of those competitors really are. Some of the additions now is the ranking factors. I know some of the other presentations earlier were talking about as well. So here we can see how has our ranking factors changed over time. So here we're just looking at our Times Higher Ed measure of scholarly output over time. It looks great. We're trending up. We've had a pretty steep increase over the last 2 years compared to the years before that. So that means great things. Our ranking is going to go up, except all rankings are relative. So when everyone else is increasing at the same time, our relative position has not changed as much. So this is where you can create custom peer benchmarks. Here I pulled all of the private AAU members as our comparison group here, but you can pull in lots of other comparison groups too. You could look at people who are kind of in the same band where you're currently placed and see how you're changing over time relative to each other. I believe that very top line is Harvard University. Yes, so it's important to look at not just your university's trend, but you need to look at where you are relative to other people, because even if you're increasing, other people could be increasing faster and could be quickly surpassing you, even though your total volume is going up. Likewise with the US News ranking. So they've only been pulling data from Elsevier for a few years. US News is notorious for changing their ranking factors and changing the weighting of those factors almost every year. So that's important to keep track of as well. But here they've used these citations per publication as one of their metrics for the past 3 or 4 years now. And this looks like another great trend line. We've been going up at kind of a steep increase. Again, this chart's a little bit hard to read. If you're in SciVal itself, you can hover over and get the tooltip so you can see what all those individual points are. But we have been increasing, but if we zoomed in and we filtered out some of these, there are a few people who are very close to us who have had a bigger change than we have. So we're a little bit risk there of, if we're not intentional, having people who can kind of come up from behind us and surpass us in some of the benchmarks that US News uses. as long as they keep using that same benchmark, because they are, like we said, notorious for changing their ranking factors. So again, we can look at this, and this is another example of where you want to look at those actual metrics, but you also want to look at the normalized metrics too. So here we're looking on the y-axis is the Times Higher Ed scholarly output measure. So it's the volume of publications that your faculty have put out. And then on the x-axis is the citation impact score. So that's a normalized score from 0 to 1. And if we look at that, Harvard, obviously way up at the top. They do way more publications than most people. CMU, we have a very high publication impact, but we're a much smaller university, so we have a much smaller volume of publications. But if we use, yes, Henry.
So the data we look at so far is looking at the total publication. So that include journal publications, conference proceedings. So a little bit of a secret in kind of for CMU is that internally CMU encourage our faculty members to present more at conferences because in computer science engineering, that's where the latest information got released. So we place a lot of emphasis on encouraging our faculty member to show up in conferences to present. So if you kind of drill down to the publication type and focusing on conference proceedings, we are off the chart. We are outliers. And that is internal policy driving some of those kind of metrics. And it's hard to look at those trends if you only look at total kind of publication citation count.
Yeah, so that's an important way you can filter those results too, is looking at the publication type, not just academic journals, but if you're in other fields like humanities, maybe book publications are more important than journal articles. So you can filter on some of those publication types as well. And like Henry said, here we're looking at just the total scholarly output. We're a smaller university. We have fewer faculty than a lot of our peers do. But we can look at the Times Higher Ed. Their rankings always normalize things on a 0 to 100 scale. So once we use their normalized here, so instead of research output, we're looking at the research productivity score, which is a 0 to 100 scale. Now we are right up there next to Harvard University when we're looking at the world university rankings here. So looking at those normalized rankings can have a very big change versus looking at just the raw volume of publications. So it's important to look at those ways of normalizing the data, both for your faculty size, but also at particular programs and disciplines that your university has a strength in. So that's where on the next slide here, we can really start to put together a picture of where are our university's strengths, where do we have opportunities for investment in growing our programs and hiring new faculty, and where are there areas where we just don't compete. We do not have a law school, we do not have a medical school. So those are areas where there's a lot of publication, there's a lot of research done. We don't compete in those areas. We don't have, we get fewer funding from NIH and things like that because we don't have a medical school. But we're very strong in computer science. We're very strong in engineering. People know that for our university. A lot of people don't know as much. We have a very strong College of Fine Arts. We have one of the largest number of Tony and Emmy winners as alumni from CMU. So that's another area where we're very strong. But looking at this here, we can start to see, when we can put together this picture of, where are there areas for investment and developing more collaborations, more grant funding, more strategic hiring for faculty members. And that's where we can start to look at who are those top performers. So if we want to go, now we're looking at this level of detail. Each point on this chart is an individual researcher. So we can look at that researcher's name, we can look at the university that they're at, and this is where Henry's work and starting to do more of a strategic hiring and recruitment process. So if we say we want to develop this program in AI, we want to bring in someone who's going to help build this new program, they're going to increase our research agenda, they're going to bring in research dollars. Who are the people that we want to make sure that we're recruiting to come and apply for that position, not just posting it and waiting for the applications to trickle in, but actively going out and recruiting people if we have an open position and making sure we're doing that. This is looking at everyone, but we can actually filter that on their track too. So if we're looking at kind of who are those rising stars, you may want to filter down and just look at people who are at the assistant or associate professor rank. And that's where you can start to get a more curated list. You can work with your hiring committee, you can work with your HR, start to look through who are those rising stars in those particular fields. And you can filter down, and if, like for Henry said, we're more focused on conference proceedings rather than journal articles, especially in some of those like AI and computer science, where the journal articles, by the time they get published, sometimes are not the cutting edge research anymore. People have moved on from those topics. So you can filter on those publication types as well and get down to those.